So why don't we get started? Looks like you guys have all received that you've all had an opportunity to get a copy of this joint report that comes from my office, comes from the Controller's office, and comes from the Budget Analyst's office. You can see the numbers on the summary that we're projecting in spite of the work that we've done in terms of the mid-year adjustments, in spite of the subsequent adjustments we have been promoting. We're looking at a shortfall of over $436 million into the new fiscal year. That number grows to $616 million, up to $743 million in the 2011-2012 year. Those numbers are, I guess, the only way to describe those out-year numbers are staggering. And it's important in terms of being able to communicate factually and accurately what these numbers reflect, to note that these are not apple-to-apple numbers based upon previous joint reports, meaning this is a joint report unlike joint reports we put in the past. This is more along the lines of what you would see from the state government and the federal government. These numbers assume no action being taken, and as a consequence of no action being taken as it relates to expenses and revenue, that those numbers would jump as significantly as these numbers suggest they would in those out years. So before we sort of roll over and panic by the size, again, I want people to caution, and hopefully in terms of the reporting of these, be thoughtful and judicious about how these are reported. The number, though, that is significant and is not, again, without consideration is that $436 million. And I say not without consideration because it's a number that I'm familiar with, that most of you are familiar with, that candidly is a little higher than we had expected a month or two ago, but not in a disproportionate way. And I say that in this context. As you know, we started with a number of $461 million. That was a number that I communicated on multiple occasions, privately and publicly. We made some mid-year adjustments. We made some other adjustments. We thought that number would start dropping below the $400 million range. We now, because of the new economic news and the new assessment in terms of our expense and revenue side, are seeing that north again of $400 million. So it requires, long-windedly, some renewed effort in terms of our budget balancing, but nothing that puts us in a perilous track. Of course, there are those that think if we had to cut $1 from one program, that is catastrophic and perilous. So it's a relative statement, isn't it? If your program is being eliminated or your program is being reduced, this is a perilous number. But in terms of the totality of the budget, it's a number that we still believe we can manage without eviscerating the Health and Human Service safety network in this city and without destroying our fabric of public safety and infrastructure investment. And we can talk a little bit more specifically about that in a moment. This number will get down by taking actions that we stated we were going to take a number of months ago and making sure we fast-track those actions. We are middle of negotiations with labor, and I have Mickey Callahan and Steve Cava here, been leading that effort with our friends in SEIU and building trades in particular. Those conversations in the last 2.5 weeks have stepped up, and we're getting close to, I think, some resolution, though I'm not going to negotiate publicly. We can talk broadly about what I mean by that. I won't get into the specifics of that, but we're hopeful that we can reach out and meet that $90 million goal that we set forth in terms of reducing the size of this $436 million shortfall. Other proposals, as you know, have included the 12.5% of budget instructions that I sent out and the additional 12.5% contingency instructions that I sent out to departments. As you know, that 12.5% on the general fund side represents about $144 million towards this solution. Additional 12.5%, an equivalent amount of money. I've made it clear, and I'll repeat this again, and it just needs to be repeated over and over and over again. I will not be accepting 25% cuts from some departments. From others, we will. And that's why these are instructions. These are not mandates. I don't believe in across-the-board cuts. I've said that many times. I'll say that again. One department can afford to make dramatic adjustments and change the way they do business and still provide a quality level of service and reduce their budget by 25%. Another department can't do that by even eliminating 15% of their budget. So we have to be thoughtful and judicious, and those are the conversations that are had almost daily in my office and and will continue to be held until we have some real clarity, which I hope to have in the next 2 weeks. Where I'll at least have 80 to 90% of the decision making that I wanted, that I'll need to make recommendations to the board in place. So I'll know probably mid-April where we're going to be in terms of getting to zero. There are many other details as it relates to how you get to zero. We can talk about those if you wish, not least of which drawing down some $49 million from the rainy day reserve. As you see in this report, $98 million we're eligible for, not 92. And that's why on the issue of the layoffs at the school district and the drawdown on the rainy day fund, I always said, don't ever write as gospel the numbers we're giving you, because they are subject to change. Well, they've changed yet again in this report. We were not eligible because of some of the federal stimulus dollars of drawing down some $6 million in the current fiscal year. As a consequence, we'll have not $92 million in the rainy day reserve. Next year, we're going to have $98 million. So $49 million goes down for us, and then they have a higher top line to draw down at the school district. School district actually likes this news. They'll get another, million and a half dollars. So they'll go north of 24 million, not 23. I think 24 and a half. We will recommend in my budget to be distributed to the school district. So that school district today is a little happier about this news, though, again, doesn't necessarily change things dramatically for us as it does for them. So those are just broad strokes, 3 areas where I'm giving you sort of some big numbers so you can get a sense of how we get down to zero. There's been a tremendous amount of myth-making, and it's been promulgated, and I won't editorialize that. Why or how, except to say that some have suggested, I don't know where possibly they could suggest this or how, it candidly is sort of curious to me that some of this FMAP money, this money that comes from the federal government, could somehow be used for capital. For someone even to assert that or suggest that is a remarkable assertion and assessment, because indeed it can't be legally, so it's not even on the table. So those that have proffered that, that know better, shame on them. For those that didn't know better, well, hopefully I've clarified that. The money will be used to offset this imbalance and for its intended purpose. And so, again, those that are blogging about this or writing about this or have claimed some insight and credited themselves with some knowledge that is not, that is unique to them, they should quickly correct and stand corrected. The FMAP money, by the way, is not all drawn down in this fiscal year. So that's another important part of this. You'll get about $34 million in the FMAP money this year, about 46 to 47 next year. It's about an 18-month roll of about $80 million that we're eligible for. But only 34 will draw down to address the $436 million shortfall this year. So again, those that had hoped that all that money will come in today to solve for the 436, it can't, but it will help us with the 616 and with the 743 as the money is drawn down. A lot of the other federal stimulus dollars, as was exampled yesterday when we were at a public housing site, is for capital and for non-general fund benefit. So you have $100+ million, closer to perhaps $200 million when it's the final analysis of money that will not go to deal with the $436 million shortfall, meaning the general fund shortfall, but will dramatically enhance our ability to provide services for public transit in enterprise departments like the Public Utilities Commission and the airport and the Housing Authority, as I exampled yesterday. Most for capital, not for operation in those budgets, but nonetheless not insignificant. They will substantially help our ability to deliver services in the city. They just won't substantially help us to address the $436 million shortfall. A final point, and then I want to open it up to everyone you see behind me and around me that can fill in any blanks and answer the questions in greater detail and specificity. The state did not meet their threshold on the $10 billion of stimulus, and as a consequence, the state is going to cut our local budget even more. And that is not, again, insignificant. We can talk about that. We can talk about what that means. I say that we had always counted that they perhaps wouldn't. I was hopeful, though, internally that they would. What they're doing, and we can talk about what they're doing, and I understand it, is it's a little bit of a game. It actually means less cut next year as opposed to more cut this year. So in a strange sense, if you had a 2-year budget, something we're promoting, something we're working with the Board of Supervisors on, something that comes out of the report that Ben Roosevelt and his team did in the Controller's report, something we're working specifically with President Chu on, then that would be reflected. That's the burden and downside of a 1-year budget, and so it goes to some of the reforms that we're proffering and promoting. But that's another trigger here that candidly was not part of the original assessment of numbers that we had provided. So again, it makes for a more difficult adjustment in the immediate term. So that's where we are. These are historically high numbers. I get that. Some could suggest percentage-wise they're not. You have to go back in history of our budgets to look at percentages. Again, the top line on the budget is well north of $6.6 billion. So you have to put it in perspective. Of course, the general fund is substantially smaller, and then the general fund that is discretionary is smaller still. So when you look at the discretionary general fund, these numbers are alarmingly high, even on percentage terms. But nonetheless, we'll navigate them and we'll address them as we have been addressing this in a forthright and judicious way. And we'll get through this and we'll remain a city that leads in almost every category. At the end of this budget, we'll be spending more on health and human services per capita than any city in the state of California by a huge margin. We will still be doing more than other cities on mental health and substance abuse and homeless programs by a substantial margin than other cities. And that's important to communicate as well. We hope for stronger recovery, so these out-year numbers are lower. We're being, I don't think, cautious, we're being honest. And again, these are probably the most honest numbers that have come out of a joint report in the 13, 14 years I've been elected office. And that's why I think this is a better approach. But this gives you a sense of why it is that we must make decisions now in order to address problems tomorrow. And why it is that we need to be cautious in our opposition to every single cut, because we don't have many choices here. If you oppose this cut and that cut and every cut, and you want to go out on the lines and protest, that's certainly you're right. But you also have a responsibility, the elected officials, and that is to deal with the reality. We can't deficit spend like the state and the federal government. We can't borrow and spend. We can't tax and spend either, though we are looking, as you all know, in this revenue strategy that I think, Steve, you've had, 4 meetings with a large group, plus dozens and dozens of quiet meetings that seem never to matter for whatever reason, but matter greatly, in fact, arguably more, in order to have a balanced strategy of revenue reform and recovery for the November ballot, which, as you all know, I've committed myself to, and working with like-minded members of the Board of Supervisors to address, as well as business representatives, not just from downtown, but business community broadly, and labor representatives, not just from the Labor Council, but labor represented broadly that are also participating in these meetings. And a big part of that, again, is reform, which is also necessary, not just, as I said, revenue. That's why we call it the 3R group, recovery, reform, and revenue group, as we want to put everything on the table. So with that, Nani, you and Ben have spent a great deal of time on this, budget analyst's office as well. This is the only report you guys do over the year where you all agree. Then the rest of the time you all find ways of disagreeing with each other, as has been the case historically in the city, but not in a disagreeable manner, because you all get along quite famously. So perhaps you can illuminate further where we are and where we're going.
Sure. The mayor did a great job, actually, of summarizing the report, and there have been a couple of minor changes to it, but it stands the way that he has laid it out for you. We have been going through process on the budget with departments to actually generate a lot of the both cuts and revenue ideas. Remember, departments themselves can also raise revenue. There are a lot of interesting fee ideas out there, and we are working with the Board of Supervisors Budget and Finance Committee early this year to have hearings on all the department budgets and some of the ideas, and that is why we're having very long hearings and hearing about what people like and don't like, mostly what they don't like, actually, in the budget. But none of those ideas are reflected here. Those would all be ideas to bring down this number and actually balance for next year, and that's the part of the process that we're in now.
And just get rid of that 436. This was last night's draft. This is this morning. It's 438. Yeah, you have that 615 and 746. But make sure you have 438. Yeah, I just want to make sure. I was going off my 6 p.m. last night traffic, which, as you can see, I crossed things out. I don't know which ones I have now. You should see the desk.
This afternoon it'll be 4:40.
It could be. I mean, truly, and that's, by the way, literally, that's the point.
It goes
of
up
this.
$2 million
It changes every few days, hours.
Right, but it's basically the same, and the mayor has very completely sort of described it, so we're here for really any questions that you might have, and Ken Bruce from Harvey Rose.
Ben, could you just, underscore the point that we're doing this a little differently than we did in previous years? So again, the whole idea of 700 million, I can see the headlines.
Sure.
What does that mean?
Sure, and so this is an important difference for folks to understand about the way the numbers are presented this year. So this is taking a look forward for the next 3 years at what we're projecting for our expenses for the city and what we're projecting for our revenues. And those numbers you see are the differences between those lines, which are growing over time. Prior joint reports made an important, and we found often wrong, assumption that each budget was solved with ongoing solutions in the first year that served to reduce the subsequent year, and then you folks have all noted that the second year is usually wrong, right? Because we end up having to balance budgets with a mix of one-time and ongoing solutions. So this is a report that just makes no assumptions about how budgets are going to get solved, just talks about what our projected revenues and expenses are and what that difference is. To the extent that ongoing solutions are used to bridge a portion or all of the $438 million shortfall, it'll reduce subsequent year shortfalls by a like amount. To the extent that one-time solutions are used, it will leave the future years unchanged.
So that includes, you guys didn't even include the cuts that are coming through in May in terms of layoffs and stuff?
No.
So the report assumes that all the cuts that have actually been enacted in previous rounds by the mayor's office are annualized, and you see that there. But the pending reductions that have been noticed but not yet implemented for May would serve to work this number down.
And for what it's worth, it turns out that number, we recall $118 million in mid-year adjustments. That annualized, and the new number, the final annualized number, because some of this may have been communicated. We work with some members of the board who were very concerned about some of those particular mid-year cuts, so we actually delayed some or eliminated some even after they were reported. Works out. And this is the burden. As I said, if we delay it, doesn't mean it ultimately will be denied, because that 118 ultimately nets out to 87.9 million. So you'll see that line item in the package. It turns out that's annualized at 87.9. It was not annualized at the 115 that we originally had because we made adjustments. We delayed some decisions. We worked with some members of the board that were concerned about some of those cuts.
So if that's the case, how is this year's budget balanced? Because that was supposed to balance the current fiscal year.
So do you want, the
Yeah.
trick this report is all about next year, right? As you know, we're not allowed to operate with a deficit or shortfall. So for 0809, we did get 118 million and more actually of solutions. We actually had a slightly higher gap, and that at the 6-month report, we kind of closed that out. For the year we're sitting on now, this is telling you, what does that mean for next year? All the things you did this year, what does that mean for next year? And that's a value of 87.9.
There was a lot of capital in one time as well that dealt with the delta on some of the delays. There was a trade-off. If we were not going to do something on a personnel side or a service side, then we had to strike some capital programs.
Are you predicting tax revenues in a conservative way? I mean, is this going to be like property transfer taxes are going to be as low as they were this year, or?
We're hoping we're right. Generally what this is assuming is consistent with what we've talked about recently, which is that the local economy continues to worsen through the end of this calendar year, and that come the end of the calendar year, early calendar year 2010, we begin to see a recovery here in the city, but that recovery will be a more gradual one than we saw in the early 2000s, where we had very rapid losses and then a very rapid bounce back. This time we're assuming that it will feel different and have a growth rates in the 2%, 3%, and 4% rate on major taxes in future years.
And you'll see just to roll back a decade on the property tax, we were seeing 11% annual growth on growth, so the compounded growth. Now we're projecting just a modest 1% on that property tax. And then the property transfer tax, we actually, one of the reasons the numbers got adjusted from last night to this morning is meeting the assessor's office. Actually, the assessor felt we were a little too optimistic with our last evening numbers than we were with the numbers we provided you. So again, this is, these numbers tend to change. Jen and Michael, maybe you could just give us a brief update. A lot of these numbers were pegged to your economic prognostication and your expectations of a recovery coming late in the calendar 09 year, slowly turning a corner in 10, but an L-shaped recovery, not even a U-shaped recovery in 10, 11.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, we obviously work quite closely with the Controller's Office on this, and, there is a art and a science to the process of trying to predict what's going to happen in the economy, but I do think there's pretty widespread agreement that we are not going to have to add another shape to the discussions. The U was the classic, what we saw in 2000, big drop, come back up. I think there is a very strong sense that we are going to come out of this much more gradually. Now, the good news is that, many of the economic fundamentals for San Francisco are still sound compared to other cities in the rest of the country and many cities across the world. We are well positioned to come out of this economic downturn. A lot of the factors which are affecting the economy now are not as it was during the dot-com boom and bust, which was so incredibly localized, but these are truly macroeconomic factors, and probably the most dominant of which is the credit crunch. And that is truly a worldwide, global financial problem, and there is every expectation that as the financial industry works through the clearing out the undergrowth of all these bad loans, that's going to be a slower process, and our economy and the world's economy depends upon capital to fuel it. So I think it's one of the driving factors that suggests this will be a more gradual recovery. But ultimately, I think for San Francisco, we think we will be well positioned to come out of this when the rest of the country is.
Remember as well, no one is spared, including Muni. You may have written, not just read, forget my audience here, about the state cuts to operation at public transit agencies up and down the state. Muni, and this is remarkable, it's so remarkable that I guess in the context of everything, it just didn't get much attention. But up and down the state, they eliminated this STIP, what they call STIP dollars. That means just immediately wiping out federal contributions to operation of public transit agencies, including Muni, which this year alone will hit our general fund, or at least your your general fund operating budget, by $43 million. Just gone. 43 million. Like that. They have to backfill that somehow. That's not the 67 million that we're projecting to get from the federal stimulus dollars. That doesn't backfill. That's capital, which is the perversity, isn't it? You've got a state that eliminates operation, but they want you to add more capital. Well, who the heck's going to drive your bus? If you're now eliminating bus drivers, who's going to do any maintenance if you don't have any personnel to do that work, or just to even take a bus and make it Muni ready? Who's going to actually organize around that? So they are going to be presenting to their board, what, next week?
Actually, next week, next Tuesday.
A very challenging scenario that we are going to, and this is a preview, ask that the public participate in a honest and reflective and thoughtful discussion that basically includes everything in terms of how we address that shortfall. And everything includes everything. So if you wonder what everything is, and you're thinking it and you haven't asked, just go, yes, that's it. And so you'll have a menu of options that will create good news. So, I mean, you'll like this. I mean, it will keep, hey, this is great. All these things, and they'll have a lot of readership. I say that lovingly. But it doesn't mean they've concluded anything, and I want to underscore that. They're just going to put everything out there because of the significance of that cut in particular. By the way, that doesn't include all the sales tax statewide that we receive for local transit or these other state dollars. So that's why it's north of 60 million at the end of the day in terms of a decline, just like that at Muni. So you can only do so much locally. And remember, we have the lowest unemployment rate, with the exception of 3 other counties in the state of California. We're outperforming the rest of the state. 58 counties, we're the 4th lowest unemployment rate in the state. I never even really include places like Marin, because, they're sort of unique bastions of high, low unemployment. But, our tier counties like San Mateo and San Francisco are doing relatively well compared to the rest of the state. I mean, you go down to Los Angeles County and other places, they're double digits north.
Can you talk a little bit about the controller's budget report project? You mentioned a 2-year budget, and I'm wondering what else you took away from that. I mean,
every recommendation in there I support.
So can you talk about Health and Human Services maybe?
Well, no specific recommendations there, so I could say the example recommendations. But look, I think this is services some responsibility in terms of how things are reported here. When people say that a cut of $1 million or $2 million is going to devastate the social service safety of our city, it just begs some factual analysis to say, does it really, when you're investing over $2.2 billion? Does it? It may if your program's being eliminated. I understand that, but in the totality, does it? It's just, you look at that report, there's simply not a city, we knew this, you knew this, you've written about it, no one's surprised by this, that invests more per capita on these services. And I'm proud of that. I'm actually happy. I'm going to defend that. And I'm going to keep fighting for more resources. I mean, we have a Laguna Honda Hospital, skilled nursing facilities. It just doesn't exist in counties across America. We have a hospital, acute care facility, SF General. That doesn't exist in many counties. So, I mean, those are the reasons. By the way, on the Health and Human Services, we have a housing first strategy. It's second to none in America for supportive services for homeless people. I mean, that's something we're all proud of. We spend more on public safety. You all know that. Prop F, I'll give you a prop. I mean, on the fire stations, everyone values their firefighters and don't want to see their fire station closed. They don't mind a fire station closing someplace else, but not in their neighborhood. And people want that minimum staffing of police officers because public safety has been a high concern. So, we make investments, I think, in places where the public wants us to make investments. And that's what the report basically underscored. It just showed the extraordinary commitment relative to other counties. And I thought that's what helped illuminate, those facts help illuminate. And I hope put a context in the budget debates at the board. So when we allow that sort of narrative that this is, the entire system is just destroyed on homelessness, if one program goes, say, wait a second, is that fair? Can you really assert that? I mean, you can assert it. Everyone's right to their own opinion, but not to their own set of facts. And I think this was helpful in that perspective. There, a lot of people recognize as well, 2.2 billion is not even close to the need, right? Needs are growing. Especially now all these state and federal, mostly state cuts, because I guess federal government's making up for any of the cuts the last 8 years quickly with this stimulus. But a lot of the state cuts just put more pressure on counties. So you have even though our CAP rolls, our county adult assistance rolls are going down, and our foster care rolls are going down, your IHSS rolls are going through the roof. That's a huge cost pressure. And guess what? State's not going to pay us what we pay our IHSS workers. So we have to decide, do we lay them off or do we pay them less? Well, we have a contract with our public authority. What can we do? And so that's a huge cost factor locally. And so it puts more pressure, this economy puts more pressure on local government.
In that vein, are you supportive of set-aside reform? I can't recall if there was a specific.
No, I've said that with the whole idea of this 3R group that we have is revenue, recovery, reform. Recovery is stimulus. I feel very strong. You've got to create conditions to stimulate your own local economy. I continue to say this. You've heard me say it, Erin, poor Erin, because she's been in these town halls, hears me say this everywhere I go. But you can't be pro-job and anti-business. You cannot be pro-job and anti-business. Who creates those jobs? So you've got to have a pro-business strategy if you want a pro-job strategy. And business is not just, the big three in Detroit. Business is, Bob and Marianne that just put their life savings to open up a little Vietnamese restaurant around the corner of the Tenderloin. And we need to create some relief, and they need to be part of that recovery. And that's why we put together a stimulus strategy, a local stimulus strategy. We need to reform. You can't continue to do business as we've done business. We've made that clear. So reform needs to be part of it. The reforms that the Comptroller's Office has offered, and there's other reforms that others are offering that are very controversial. But that's all being discussed in this big group. And then there's revenue. And you've got to look at your revenue structure. And you've got to look at the tax base. And you've got to look at strategic ways of potentially finding new revenue. But that doesn't mean just raising taxes. You can find new revenue in multiple different areas. You can do more fees. You can do more fines. God forbid. They're already too high. You can resolve to find revenue by monetizing assets. One person's monetization is another person's privatization. Third rail. There's ways of doing business differently in the city that can actually generate more revenue without ultimately costing the taxpayers more money, just costing certain industries a little more in a way that is not devastating in terms of their business practices. So we're looking at revenue broadly.
So I didn't hear an answer on set-aside reform.
Oh, sure. I mean, that has to be in the mix. You have to look at everything. But, I was saying to someone the other day, do people really want less investment in libraries? Do they want less investment in children's services? Do they want less investment in public safety? Or less in muni? And so you say, all right, well, let's get rid of those set-asides. Is that really going to save you money? Many argue that children's fund's not good enough. We need more money. People argue libraries, we need to keep all of them open, not just on Saturdays, but all of them should be expanded hours on Sundays. All of them, not just the number of new ones we advanced this year. By the way, I don't know a city in the United States that expanded its Sunday hours in the middle of this recession. San Francisco just did, something we're very, very proud of that I don't think got a lot of attention. Does mean you need less money? I don't know anyone that would argue. So you get rid of the set-asides, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to save money. Just means you have more liberty to move the money around. So, just be careful, in the nomenclature of it. It sounds great, it makes you feel good, but at the end of the day, do you want less than 1,971 police officers? Last year, I don't know a supervisor or a city leader that did. They wanted more police, right? They wanted more walking the beat, more in uniform, more. In fact, they even prescribed, no city in American history had ever done this. Talk about bad police practice. You had legislators demanding more of the police professionals should actually have their boots in what streets they're supposed to walk. And I don't know a city with 4.3 earthquake yesterday as a reminder, 1906 earthquake as a reminder this month, and that wants less firefighters. I mean, it's why the public overwhelmingly supported that set aside. So I say all that long-windedly just to underscore it. It sounds good from some people's perspective. From others, it may not do that much good.
Mr. Newsom, which departments are being spared for 25%?
You'll see that in my budget.
Excuse me, I have a question here. Having joined recently the low income, I worked all my life and had good salary. Now things like fee for botanical garden becomes a big issue for me because I rely on free museum day, free Golden Gate Park, and things like that. So that if you start charging, you're in fact eliminating us.
Yeah.
So
there you go. So if I don't do that, and by the way, the Botanical Garden, Strawberry is personal to me. I was there Sunday, in fact, at my grandfather's Arthur Menzies garden there. So I appreciate that, and it was free, which I enjoyed, as everyone else there enjoyed on the beautiful Sunday. But if we don't do that, then what do we do? And I haven't found anything that we've offered that anyone likes. Not one thing. If you guys let me know, if you can report, hey, everyone agrees on this cut. I just haven't met that person that said, great cut, fantastic cut, well done. Yeah, keep up the good work. But you can see we don't have a choice here. And so everyone needs a bad guy. It's my responsibility, and the charter gives me that authority as well, by the way, and that's a nice thing because it gives me confidence. That's why I have a little more confidence in this process. Some get frustrated, we're in a crisis. I'm not there. I mean, we're going to get there because I know we can get there, and I know we have the authority to get there. It's going to be challenging.
The projected costs on open labor agreements, it looks like there's
$31.8 million for next fiscal year, then $48.2 in the 2011-2012 fiscal year. It seems like one of the bigger increases in the budget. I don't know if there's a strategy to deal with that or.
So just a point that on the report, so consistent with reports in the past, the report makes an assumption that there's a CPI applied on open labor contracts as they come due. It doesn't mean that the city would end there. It's not a commitment by the city to pay a certain wage. It's simply a projection methodology.
Mm-hmm. And as I told Ben, I said, what CPI? It feels like we're in a deflationary environment. You can imagine if we have a real CPI in 3 or 4 years with this amount of stimulus. But Vicki, why don't you answer that? Because you're negotiating as we speak. You're not as we speak. But in generic terms, you're having these honest discussions with labor.
Absolutely. We have, since mid-December, I'd say we've been in contact with our many labor organizations, upwards of 40, depending on how you count, and have asked them all for economic relief from wage increases primarily that were negotiated in better days. Typically, our city labor contracts are on a 3-year cycle. We extended many of them because of the Prop B agreement that I think people know about, which included a wage freeze in return for some concessions on retiree benefits, health benefits, and a minor pension improvement last year, thinking that that would cover us with the wage freeze. Unfortunately, as you've heard, we're not in a position to offer any kind of wage increases. The contracts that we have open right now, there's only 14. We are unfortunately in the position of asking for significant concessions from those individuals, economic concessions. The contracts that are not open, we are also speaking to our labor colleagues and asking for assistance because, frankly, to the extent that we fail to meet the $90 million cost of these scheduled wage increases in terms of concessions, that translates directly into layoffs and service cuts. And the unions do have an interest in reducing the impact on their members from layoffs. We've had upwards of 700 layoffs since last summer. Many of those people have received jobs at a lower rate of pay, for example, jobs they had 10 years ago. Still a very significant economic hit on those individuals. So our largest labor union is SEIU. We have some 11,000 in the miscellaneous group. We met all day with them yesterday. We're meeting again tomorrow. We have a big push on to try and make an agreement to try and save ourselves some money on this. They are scheduled to receive a 3.75 wage increase on April 4th, so time is of the essence. But we think that everybody's involved in the process in good faith and wants to try and figure out a way to make it happen, but we're having to be pretty creative.
Have they opened their contract yet?
The way it works is they don't say they're going to open the contract unless we have an agreement, because no organization would just open its contract and suffer the consequences. We have a very different standing with the unions who have an open contract, because if we fail to reach an agreement, we can go to arbitration. That's not the case for those with a closed contract. For those with a closed contract, we have to say, please help us. And that's what we've been doing all around the city.
So it's still closed?
It's still officially closed. We did, however, as an example, the first contract concessions that we brought in, I think, have gone through the board now, but it's our Teamsters supervising nurses in the hospitals, and they took a permanent reduction in their upcoming wages for no quid pro quo, because they told us that they wanted to reduce the impact of layoffs in the hospital.
There's, to me, a direct correlation. It's self-evident when the number is this large to these type of creative discussions to get to that $90 million, and then the inability to get there. If we have that gap, there's no way I can cut more health services and human services. I just won't do it. I can't do it. So I'll have to look at layoffs now. The question is, how do you do layoffs that don't directly impact services? And that's increasingly challenging because of the number of layoffs that we've already processed, which is rather significant by relative terms. So they are negotiating for their brothers and sisters, their jobs in many respects. It doesn't mean I can guarantee there'll be no additional layoffs, but I can guarantee there'll be a lot less. And that's why, as Mickey and Steve, they have been, I will say, forget the shirts outside and the protests and the rhetoric. Inside, it's been very collegial and responsible and respectful. And I, again, I've said this privately so many times and publicly, I don't know more enlightened labor leadership. Of course, my subjectivity, I've never experienced outside the city labor, but I got to tell you, this is labor unions. These are the unions step up every year. We need them. They have historically. Certainly in the 5 years I've been mayor, and at the end of Mayor Brown's tenure, they stepped up and they kept clinics open, they kept rec centers open, and they kept the doors open here. And I think this year will be no exception.
Can I ask a little bit about the federal stimulus dollars? There's a lot of interest out there, and people are saying, is this the stuff that's formula funding? How much money are we going to get? How much are we eligible for that we can compete for? Does anybody have a handle on the number?
Each of them went backwards.
Which one?
Back towards.
Yes, you got it.
So, Kiri,
you happen to be sitting next to our stimulus czarina, who is happy to answer that question in detail.
Thank you. We have found that the stimulus funding is coming in waves, if you will. After the bill was passed, there were some awards that were announced quite quickly, including one that the mayor was out at the Housing Authority for yesterday, the Public Housing Capital Fund, and that was approximately $18 million. Almost on a daily basis, the federal government is figuring out what some of their formulas are and being able to make announcements. And to date, we estimate, and I say estimate because it is evolving and there is still action required at the state in many instances, or action required at the local level, or a program submission to be made. Even when you receive a formula allocation, you have to put together a proposal and submit it. So it's a little bit of a gray area. But to date, we estimate that we will be receiving approximately $240 million in what I call the first wave of funding. Again, these are just some of the formula programs, and in one case at the airport, it is a discretionary program. Many of those you've heard about. It's the $67 million at Muni. It's the FMAP money that they spoke about previously. It's some of the funding that's going to the airport, some Department of Public Work projects. We have
Streets, repave.
$13 million for street paving. We have a $3 million justice program that will go to public safety. Just last week, the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Awards were made, which is $7.7 million. Often when they announce the awards, they don't announce the program guidelines with them. They say, we've figured out what you'll be getting, stay tuned, we'll come back to you with information on exactly what will be an eligible expense. So as the waves come, the second wave of funding will be the competitive programs. And we have technical teams at the department level that have been working very hard on those programs where we know the grant program guidelines exist, so we can craft a proposal. There are many instances where they still haven't defined what the competitive program is going to be. Certainly high-speed rail is one of those instances where we're watching closely. That could be very meaningful excuse me, for the Transbay project. Technology, broadband technology, that is another huge source of funding that will be available nationally, and we're doing work at the state level and also nationally to advocate for how those competitive allocation or program guidelines get written so that we can be as competitive as possible. So there's no way really at this point to anticipate or even forecast what we might go after on the competitive side, primarily because in many instances they haven't defined what the program would be. We have no shortage of ideas upon which to build in many instances where we're a leader for Healthy San Francisco, or adding a health IT component to Healthy San Francisco. And so the departments have been doing a lot of work to be well positioned to be competitive. Additionally, I would just like to add that we've I think are leading the way on the transparency side. You know, the mayor has made a strong commitment and asked departments to have meetings with their commissions, with their committees, with the public. To date, we've had over 10 public meetings. All of them have been noticed under the regular course of action. They've been at the Adult Probation Commission. They've been at the Health Commission. We've had 5 meetings with the Board of Supervisors articulating grants received to date, our competitive proposals or ones that we're working on that I just mentioned. And we have a whole series of additional public meetings that will be coming up in April. And all of this will be captured on recoverysf.org. Not only the list of public meetings, but also the grants that we have received to date and the programs that they are associated with. And as we are putting together our grant proposals and submit them, we will post those as well. So the public will have an opportunity to go and...
No, that site's not up yet.
Nope.
It will be up soon. I know how people that go and get frustrated, but we're working.
Within days, hopefully.
Yeah, we'll get to that. I mean, we'll get it done soon, and we'll let you know. But that is important, so people will be able to get in detail and navigate exactly where those stimulus dollars, their federal dollars, are going, and be able to ask questions on the site as well. So it will be a very interactive site, make a very helpful site when it's up and running. As you know, we've had teams of people out in Washington, D.C. I think most of the teams have been out. I'll be back there. I know people tend to love when I leave, and then they hate when I leave. You know, who the hell knows? So you'll write about me going again, but I'll be out there next week on the stimulus stuff. Stimulus side, stuff's a terrible word. And so we'll be, you know, this is all of the competitive side. This is where we are being most aggressive, and I think we'll stand to gain significantly. But remember, of that roughly $250 million, only a small percentage of that addresses the $438 million shortfall. And this just needs to be underscored, because in and of itself is not going to save us from making the tough choices that need to be made and have been made in the last few months.
I have a question. I think we were both at the hearing, which was about green jobs, and there was a discussion about what is the definition of a green job. I was interested to know what the city leaders, how they define it.
Well, anything associated with sustainability is a green-collar job. So recycling jobs, people picking up recycling, people processing recycled material, that's a green-collar job. A job, for example, in HR or accountant job associated with a company that is in the green building sector is a green-collar job. A job that is involved in the more obvious jobs are weatherization or energy generation or storage or efficiency. Those are all green-collar jobs. So we define it quite literally, but very broadly, because again, all of these areas are jobs in the green tech and green sector.
And I ask because I think some community members were positing their definition as being people who also would formerly have been blue collar, so don't have many skills and would stand to gain a skill that once the money's gone, they would still have something. Well,
in terms of the workforce training strategies, we're enhancing our workforce training strategies. For example, City Build Academy and others, we're basically taking all our workforce training and we're greening the workforce training strategies. Ultimately, the whole narrative of San Francisco's efforts on the environment is to take them out of the silo of the Department of Environment and connect them to our building codes, to our charter, basically greening the governance of the city and county of San Francisco. So we have a very broad approach to this, but it's certainly very targeted in this application, and particularly in the workforce training sector. So absolutely.
What are the total layoffs for this fiscal year, and what do you anticipate they will be?
Well, we did
next year?
the notices for May 1st. Mickey, remind me the three. What was the exact number? Because that was another number of threes. This 320, 318, 307,
we had
298. What was it?
We have for the May 1 notice, they included some that are due April 18th, I believe. So that's in the Department of Public Health. So I can confirm that. I think it's on the order of 300. I'm looking at Nani.
Yeah, it's three, and it keeps bouncing around. It's around 300. I mean, that's, and by the way, it will change anyway, so we'll say roughly 300 notices that went out. They haven't actually, I mean, again, we have till May 1st in most cases.
Right, and it does happen that people may decide to retire rather than take the layoff or move to a job that they held 20 years ago. So sometimes we rescind those layoffs and they convert to retirement. So.
And the projections for next fiscal year?
We too early to estimate, but they're on the table. Have to be. Do the math. It's either no layoffs and then another 20% cut in all these departments, or twice as much labor concession. I mean, again, it's you guys. I mean, we couldn't be more transparent here in terms of where we are and where we need to go and getting to that gap and that delta. So layoffs are still on the table.
Well, that raised my question. So if I do my sketchy math here, it looks like you're at about 378 in terms of, if you look at the 25% cut, not necessarily across the board, 25% cut, and then the 90 million.
So that'd be 288.
288 plus 90, so 378.
378 plus, if you want to do the rainy day fund, another 50.
Okay.
Plus some stimulus dollars, you're getting close.
Okay.
But again, that diminishes the incredible work that Nani does. I mean, just three quick line items. I mean, this is hundreds and hundreds of tough decisions that need to be justified because we know they'll be reviewed and aired publicly. And we have to make judgments that this is better than something else. And it gets harder. Every one of these dollars is harder and harder. And, yes, look, we're not going to do 25% cuts at Department of Public Health. That's just not going to happen. Not everyone knows. I've said that 150 times. Never have I accepted all the cuts coming out of the commissions at the Health Department, ever. I won't again. But there'll be substantial cuts. There just has to be on a general fund is large. They're north of $400 million. That general fund at the Department of Public Health, a $1.5 billion budget. It's bigger than some states' the Department of Public Health budget, so you don't have a choice. But I know that's difficult. But so is the Recreation Department cuts, and so will be every cut. No one's going to be satisfied. I'm not satisfied. I don't like making these cuts. None of them. They don't even like coming to my office now, saying you're not going to. They start with the preamble. You're not going to like this, so we're going to go away. You read it on your own time, and then when then come back, and we know you're going to say no, that's not. And so it's not easy, but we're getting there. As I said, we'll be 80 to 90% there in the next couple weeks. So in terms of our internal process, and then we'll start to externalize it and communicate it more deliberatively with members of the board and members of the public.
I don't know if this mentioned about, but if the May election, the proposition failed, is that this projection is included here?
Remember, what they project on the May 19th special election, which is going to cost us $4.4 million. Just the appropriation. I think the board may be acting on that today. I signed off on that a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, 4.37 or something, well, almost 4.4 million. Yeah, and there's no guarantee they reimburse us for that. I always say special elections. I mean, that's why when people are rushing to do tax revenues on a special election, I sort of comment, you need to analyze whether or not it's going to cost you more money to do the special election than the money you can collect in taxes. I'm not being figurative there. I'm being quite literal, and this is a perfect example as to why. The budget in the state is out of balance by $8 billion from their what they struck in terms of the balanced budget on the deal a few weeks back. If they project, if the special election does not pass or go forward, they'd be out of balance an additional $6 billion, so $14 billion. Now, they haven't dealt with the $8 billion yet, and that's why they pulled back some of our money to deal with it. That's why, again, it's why our numbers this year are a little higher, so they can address the $8 billion without having to make the cuts as part of the old deal, take the hits only once. Not all of that's going to be dealt with immediately. Remember, most of the special election is just extending taxes. So they'll have some time to deal with it. It's not going to mean precipitous decline in revenue this year. They're not going to be able to capture immediately with a hammer $6 billion of cuts because they're raising sales taxes tomorrow, with or without Prop A, B, C, D, all the rest. They're going to do the VLF. They're going to do all of these things anyway. It's just extending them for a couple years and then allowing us to borrow against your gambling habits. Your, meaning ours, collectively. You're just, if you buy a lottery ticket, I bought them, so I'm one of them, with the Lottery Modernization Act, which all that means is gamble more so we can borrow more to pay off interest on debt that we've previously collected. If that doesn't pass and they can't borrow all that money, they weren't going to be able to get all that money tomorrow anyway. So, again, they're going to tell you they have to tell you this in order to get these things to pass, that it just means catastrophic. Well, that's not necessarily a fair analysis.
All right, we got to wrap it up. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.